Hi, my name is Trevor Klee, and this is the LSAT logic games process. In this, I'm going to show you my strategy for the logic games and how I scored 175 on my own LSAT, and also how I've scored a bunch of my students to score 170 plus on their LSAT. So before I start, I just want to say if you want a whole book of these strategies, showing them in action on a bunch of logic games, check out my book on my Gumroad page, gumroad.com/Trevor Klee. So that has the whole book. And if you're looking for LSAT tutoring or coaching, check out my website, trevorkleetutor.com. All right, with that being said, let's go forward from here. So what is the LSAT logic games process? So it's based on a couple things. So, really 4 steps. These are much more straightforward than pretty much anything you've seen from other courses or tutors or whatever, and there's a good reason for that. I think, sort of abide by the KISS principle, keep it simple, stupid. And I think the most important reason to keep it simple is because while these very complicated approaches with complicated diagrams might work fine for like your standard linear or grouping or whatever setup, more recent LSATs have been throwing some more complicated setups, some crazy games. And if you have this very complicated diagramming setup, it ends up being very brittle, which is not what we want. You don't want it to be brittle. We want something that's flexible. So I have a 4-step process that I do for all logic games. Pretty straightforward. So let's go through it. So first, I do almost no work in logic games before I answer the first question. The only thing I do is I make sure I understand the rules. Now, I've underlined that, or in this case, double underlined it, because a surprising number of my students forget to do that. They'll just jump straight in and they'll get to like question 3 and look at the rules and be like, wait a minute, I don't think I got that right in the first place. And then it's a mess because now you have to go back and redo the first 2 questions. So I really make sure I understand the rules before I do any question. Like if I might even draw out like a sample thing if I'm like really confused on what something means. Then I jump into the questions. For each question, I follow the rules as far as they go. So if the question says, if this is first, then what's next? I'll say, okay, A's first, then B, then C, right? So I'm always looking to follow the rules as far as they go. Anytime a new term comes up, so you'll see in this one, it's all about video games. So anytime a new video game term comes up, I'm going to look back at my rules and I'm going to say which rules apply to this video game. So which rules? So I'm always looking back. Which rules apply? Which rules apply? Now I can make this inference, so then what rules apply? So I'm always going step by step. And you'll notice this is a very linear process, right? So I go and I make my next inference, and I'm like, okay, now I know this. Let me check back to the rules. Okay, based on that, let me make another inference. So it's always checking back to the rules and following them. Once I've followed the rules as far as I can go with the question, I cross out my unlikely answer choices. So this is a pretty important step. I should have a pretty good idea of which ones are easier to do, which ones are harder to do. So for instance, if it says what must be true, and it says the game with a bunch of, like the video game with a bunch of restrictions on it is first, well, that can't be right. Like if it has a bunch of restrictions on it, probably doesn't have to be true that this is, I don't know, last if, most of the restrictions are pointing to it not. Or if it says which of the following cannot be true, and it says the one with no restrictions on it is third, I'm like, well, the one with no restrictions on it is probably fine to be third, right? It has no restrictions on it. It can go pretty much anywhere. So I cross out my unlikely answer choices, and then I'll be left with a certain number of answer choices, maybe 2 or 3. And then again, I follow the answer choices with the rules as far as they go. So the answer choice brings up, video game C. I say, okay, let me go back to the rules and check what I know about video game C. Brings up video game D. Okay, let me go back to the rules and check what I know about video game D. And then again, once I make that check, then I'm following it again. This is the only time where I might actually bring out a diagram, but that's only if I have trouble actually keeping track of all this stuff in my head. And when I do diagrams, I do very simple diagrams. So I might do that, right? A, then B, I'll leave a blank space for the third spot, and then C. Very simple diagrams all the time. Or if it's a grouping, maybe A, B, C, D, right? Very simple diagrams. I'm not doing any complicated symbols, and that's really just the sort of notes that I need to take because I can't keep track of everything in my head. But, the mental work I do is mental. Drawing out diagrams isn't going to be your substitute for thinking. It's just a way to keep track of things. All right, so this is the process. I make sure I understand the rules. I follow the rules in the questions using this linear thinking process. What's step 1, step 2, step 3? I cross out my unlikely answer choices. And then for the ones that are left, I will follow them as far as they go. All right, let's check this process out. This is an original game that I've adapted from official LSAT game. I didn't use the official LSAT game because the LSAT does not allow that on YouTube because they're an organization of a bunch of lawyers and all they do is sue people. So let's do our original questions here. So video game tournament must decide the order in which 7 video games are played. Albatross, Games, Indigo, Ergo, Qantas, Tribute, New York. I'm sure you've noticed each of these have a different starting letter. Always do that on the LSAT. Each video game will be played only once before the next match begins, and each video game will be played one time. Due to the schedule of the competitors, the following conditions apply. Albatross must be played before Indigo. If Games is played before Qantas, then Indigo and Tribute must also be played before Qantas. Ergo must be played before Indigo and Qantas or after both of them. Tribute must be played after York or after Albatross, but not both. So these are reasonably straightforward rules. Albatross is before Indigo. Cool. If Games is before Qantas, Indigo and Tribute must be played before Qantas. So this is an important thing. We're going to pay attention to this if, right? We don't know anything about what happens if Games is not played before Qantas. All we know is if Games is before Qantas, Indigo and Tribute are also before Qantas. So pay attention to that if. Ergo must be played before both Indigo and Qantas or after both of them. So it's, there's an implied both here, which is kind of important. And then last, Tribute must be played after York or after Albatross, but not both, which is pretty much the same thing as Tribute must be played between York and Albatross. All right, cool. So now I understand the rules. So now let's go to the questions, and I'm going to follow these rules with the questions. Games is played first, which of the following could be true? So if Games is played first, that brings me to question 2. If Games is played first, it must be played before Qantas, which means Indigo and Tribute must also be played before Qantas. So Games before Qantas, Indigo and Tribute must also be played before Qantas. All right, York is played after Indigo. That's probably fine, right? York, the only rule here is rule 4, which means York could be at the end and then Indigo could be first. So I'd pick that one. And if I was pressed for time, I'd just leave it there. But I'm not pressed for time, so let me go through the rest of these. Qantas is played before Albatross. No, because Indigo is before Qantas and Albatross is before Indigo, right? It's rule 2 and rule 1. Combine those rules, done. Ergo is played 5th. This one I'm less sure about either way. I do know Ergo is going to be before both of these or after both of these. And 5th is somewhere in the middle, right? I have 7 total video games. 5th is like middle last. So probably not. If I was really not sure, I would check it. but A seems so okay that I don't feel like checking C. Tribute is played second. Let's see, games is first. That means Indigo and Tribute must be played before Qantas. This can't work because Tribute must be played after York or after Albatross. So Tribute cannot be played second because it needs number two. Well, it needs York or Albatross before it. And then Albatross is played sixth. If Albatross is sixth, rule one, Indigo is seventh. And then there's no room for Qantas. So A. So again, you notice I'm just following the rules on each of these. Every time I see a new term, I see Qantas, I see Albatross, I see Ergo, I go back and see which of my rules apply. All right. Number two, which of the following could be the first and second games to be played respectively? Albatross and Indigo. That one's probably fine. Albatross and Indigo, pretty easy for both of them to be early because rule one is the only one that applies to Albatross and Indigo. The rest of them that apply to Indigo is rule two, which is just going to be, says a case in which Indigo is early. So again, if I was pressed for time, I'd just guess A, but I'm not, so let me check the rest. Games and Qantas, rule two says no, because if games is before Qantas, Indigo and Tribute must be before Qantas. So no. C, Ergo and Indigo, no, because this is rule one. Albatross must be before Indigo, no. Tribute and games, well, let's see. So what I know is Tribute, this means Tribute is going to be before Qantas. And this means games is also going to be before Qantas. And no, Tribute must be between York and Albatross. Nope, and that also crosses out E. Tribute must be between York and Albatross. Cool. All right, rule three, or question three. Which of the following cannot be the fifth and sixth games to be played respectively? Remember, we have 7 total games, so sixth is not last. That's an easy mistake to make. Make sure you know sixth is not last here. So, which of the following cannot be the fifth and sixth games? Tribute and York, that's probably fine, right? Because that just means Albatross is sometime before, because Tribute's between York and Albatross. That is probably fine, so I'm not really going to check that. Qantas and Ergo, that's probably fine, right? That just means Ergo is after both of them, which means, Indigo was sometime before. So probably fine. York and Tribute, this cannot work. So if Tribute is after York, then according to our last rule here, right? Rule 4, Tribute's after York. Then it also needs Albatross after it, but that's already our 7th spot. So we have no space for Indigo, which has to be, after that. So this cannot be true. And if I was pressed for time, I'd leave it there, but I'm not, so I'm going to keep going. Albatross and Indigo, probably fine for 5th and 6th. My 7th is just going to be, I don't know, something else, maybe Ergo. So that's fine. Albatross and games, yeah, that's probably fine. That just means I need Indigo on my last, right? Because Albatross doesn't need to be directly before Indigo, just needs to be sometime before it. So I can just do Albatross, games, Indigo sometime later, and then, I'd get Tribute sometime before. So that's probably fine. So pretty straightforward. Again, notice I'm relying a lot on what seems likely or unlikely as I go through this, because it's going to take a long time to check all these. So it's way easier to just check what seems likely or unlikely. All right. Which of the following cannot be the second and third games to be played respectively? So for second and third, we're going to do similar thing. Albatross and Indigo, second and third, yeah, probably fine, right? Because, that works. York and Tribute, So that just means York is before Tribute, which means Albatross is sometime afterwards. So that's probably fine. Quantus and Ergo. Let's see. So if it's Quantus and Ergo, and that's second and third, that means I need Indigo, right? So this is now my rule 3 that I'm worried about. That means I need Indigo before both Quantus and Ergo, and that cannot work because I would need Albatross also there. But that doesn't give me enough room, right? Because I'd have to do Indigo, Quantus, Ergo, and I'd have to put Albatross here, but I've already done my first, second, third. So it has to be this one. This one cannot be true. Ergo and Indigo, probably fine, right? Ergo is just sometime before Indigo, and Albatross has to be before Indigo, which means Albatross is first, and that should be fine. And then Indigo and Quantus, that Indigo just needs to be sometime before. Indigo is just going to be after Albatross, so it just go Albatross, Indigo, Quantus, and then again should be fine. Ergo is going to be sometime after Quantus and Indigo. Yeah, totally fine. All right. So again, I don't need to work out all of these. I'm just working out, yeah, it's probably fine. And you notice again, I keep going back to the rules. I think diagramming a lot people use so they don't have to remember the rules, but I find it's just a lot to keep in my head. I'd rather just keep track of this stuff in my head. Or I'd rather just use the paper to keep track of it and not have to keep track of it in my head and not have to diagram it either. All right. If York is played first, which of the following must be true? If York is played first, let's see. So if York is played first, that means Tribute's going to be sometime before Albatross. So York is played first, which means Tribute's going to be before Albatross, right? Because Tribute's between York and Albatross. And if Tribute is before Albatross, that means Indigo is also sometime after this. I don't think there's any other deductions I can make from there. So those are all the deductions I can make from my initial question. So I'm just going to go from here. Ergo must be played last. No, not necessarily. Ergo is going to be... Yeah, it's actually no real rule on Ergo, right? It's just either before or after Indigo and Quantus. I know Indigo is going to be pushed somewhere late, but I don't know anything more than that. So no. Ergo before games, not necessarily true. Again, I don't know where Ergo goes. Tribute must be played before Indigo? Yes, that's what we already deduced. Cool. Albatross must be played third. No, tempting based on this, but we actually don't have any real reason to believe that, right? I could put Ergo there pretty easily. And then Albatross would be fourth. So this is tempting if you don't draw your diagram correctly, but notice how I've left spaces in between all of these. It's because there are spaces in between all of these. I don't have any immediately before such and such. So Quantus must be played before games. Let's take a look. Does Quantus have to be played before games? No, it can be either one. I don't have any rules that say Quantus has to be played before games or vice versa. If Quantus was played after games, then, yes, rule 2 would apply, but that'd still be fine. I'd just put Quantus somewhere at the end. All right, last one up. If Indigo is played last, which of the following must be true? So I've got a couple things that apply to Indigo, right? If Indigo is played last, then I've got Albatross sometime before it, obviously. I've got games can't be before Quantus, right? Because Indigo has to, if games is before Quantus, Indigo is before Quantus. But if Indigo is last, So indigo is not. So I'm going to cross out that one. This, I can't make this rule apply, or this rule should not apply. Ergo must be played before indigo and Qantas, or after both of them. Yeah, so for this one, ergo is going to be sometime before both, before Qantas. So, I've got ergo and then Qantas at some point. Cool. Tribute is after York or after Albatross, not both, doesn't really apply. So the only one I have for sure here is that I can't let rule B apply. So let's say Qantas is sometime before games. So I'm going to do something like this. Qantas has to be sometime after games, and ergo has to be sometime before Qantas. All right, so let's do that. Ergo must be played after York. No, York could be first, actually. There's nothing preventing it. Tribute must be played before games. No, not necessarily. Tribute could really be right at the end if I do like Albatross and then Indigo. So I could do, Tribute and then Albatross and then Indigo. So I think that'd actually be fine. So let's do that. Albatross must be played sixth. No, Albatross can really go anywhere here, right? Albatross doesn't need to be directly before Indigo. It's like a very easy misreading to make, but it's just sometime before. Ergo must be played before games. Yes, I already deduced that right here. Then ergo must be played first. Not necessarily. I don't know where ergo goes. I just know it goes before both Indigo and Qantas. So for this one, again, deduced it pretty easily. Not checking all my answers. I'm just saying what seems reasonable and unreasonable. And then based on what I've deduced, I actually found the answer pretty easily. So this is the process. I made sure I understood the rules. For each question, I followed the rules as far as they went. I crossed out unlikely answer choices, and then for the ones that were left, I followed the answer choice with rules as far as I went. Cool. So that's it for the logic games process. Again, if you want a lot more logic games, explanation of how I work, please check out my logic games book, gumroad.com/Trevor Klee. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Keep track of this channel for more videos on LSAT. Like, subscribe. Thanks.